Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome. I am so excited to have Lois Nembhard in the studio from HumanitiesDC. Today we're going to talk about a really interesting way that HumanitiesDC has integrated journalism into the communities it serves and sort of why that was happening and what you hope to achieve. So welcome to the program, Lois.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks so much for having me.
So, I probably imperfectly teased the community journalism program. So, first, tell us a little bit about why Humanities DC is interested in journalism in the first place, and then we can move on to the actual program, like what you were doing about it.
Okay, sounds good. So it was probably 2022, we have a district fellowship program where individuals who are interested in the humanities and interested in nonprofits can be fellows with us. And we had one with our oral history program, interestingly enough, and she is a journalist. She is a journalist, so that's her background. And that her capstone project was the idea of this program. And we really liked it. It really fit with, we really see ourselves as a council about being, helping people to tell the stories of DC in different ways. And this seemed a really interesting way to go about that. And particularly thinking about communities that maybe don't often have the opportunity to tell their own stories or have their stories told in their voices. So we were really intrigued by the idea of it and decided to move ahead with making it a program. It came in the early stages of HumanitiesDC kind of rethinking and relaunching who we are. We gone through a huge change of staff and more importantly, leadership. So at the time we were thinking about what our programming would look like. So it was just perfect timing. And we said, why don't we give this a try? And Dana Brozos Kelleher, who's a journalist who was a fellow, she helped to launch it.
And I love the idea of using storytelling as that through line, because when you break journalism down, to its base parts, you're gathering information and news, but you're also telling stories. And so just how is that kind of you had earlier said that was a touch point of Humanities DC. Can you
Absolutely.
expound on that a little bit more and kind of the things? So I also love the oral history piece that you were doing, but how do you center storytelling in your work?
But really for us, it's the community themselves and community members deciding what that might look like. So we do grant making. Typically, moving forward, everything will be an anomaly because of the funding situation that everyone's dealing with.
Right.
But we used to do a little bit over $1 million in grant making, and that went to individuals, community groups, and nonprofit organizations who, using the humanities in different ways, were telling essentially just we think of it as the stories of their community. So it could be a documentary, it could be a oral history project, it could be a curriculum on something of importance, it could be a walking tour, it really could be a festival, lots of different things. And so the community was determining how they wanted to uncover, document, and share what DC has been about, is about, and could be about in the future. And then we also had our public programming, which largely we try to do in partnership with others, which it also is telling the stories of DC also in different ways. Our Oral History Collaborative, we're really proud of, and right now is definitely our longest standing program. And that is individuals deciding for themselves what they want to document about DC's history. So once again, it's the community deciding what that might look like. And we provide training. And then through this wonderful relationship we have with the DC Public Library, the oral histories that are collected go into the People's Archive. So not only does that individual or that organization have that story for themselves and to share with though the storytellers, but it's also housed in the public archives, what we call the People's Archive at the DC Public Library for anyone to access into the future.
Oh, that's so interesting. And so it really feels like in the program, let's not let our listeners sort of twist thinking like, what is this program they keep talking about? You created or Humanities DC in concert with others created a community journalism training
Mhm.
program, which, as I understand it, equipped members of the public who were interested in telling stories, but also with a kind of a newsy focus,
Exactly.
equip them with skills and training to allow them to do that over a multi-week period, and
Mhm,
then worked with other partners to try and get those things published. So
mhm.
is that like the
Yep,
15-second summary?
yep, that absolutely is.
But there's so much more that goes into that.
Yeah.
So, and I think also, let's kind of start at the end where some of the work I know was published in the Washington Informer and in the Afro. So, how did you kind of start to conceptualize this with where is the end product going to go, or were you really freeform about what you were going to get out of it, or people were going to get out of it?
More free form. The idea was that each individual would write some type of story and that we would then pitch it to local media with the hope that it would get picked up. So they would all have probably what would be their first byline. But we also knew that all the stories would get published in something that we would put out ourselves as well. So it's on our website. And then we have a few hard copies as well of this little publication that has all their stories in it. So we certainly started from the beginning with reaching out to different local media outlets, not knowing what that would look like, but
Hmm.
that's a delightful outcome that someone would get published, but not the main focus of whether or
Hmm.
not we would move forward and whether or not they would write their stories.
So, and I think I'm also wanting to bridge a little bit like storytelling into news gathering and journalism and just kind of orienting, because when I think there's a recent study that I think it's 22% of Americans know a journalist or are familiar with a journalist. So
Mhm.
the the public's perception of news media is a little different, or journalism might bring up them feeling in some sort of way that and so when you conceptualized this program and started to roll it out, and take applications or things of that nature, what surprised you, or what did were there was there a gap between what you were putting out and what people were picking up
Mhm.
about the program?
I think the biggest surprise in year 1, we had 67 people apply to be part of the program, and so
Wow.
that was certainly a shock, and so we realized that there's clearly is this interest in the whole idea of journalism. It's a huge range of folks, so we conceptualize and we're trying to think about this potentially a little bit differently this coming year, but that is people with little to no experience at all, and that's who we were bringing along. But the applicants really ran the gamut. Certainly not really, really experienced, but folks who had some experience and just felt like they were missing the idea of having a journalism 101 training. So
Mhm.
realizing that there was such a need out there for this was probably the biggest shock initially. And then so trying to figure out how do we select the folks who fit what we thought was most important, those with little to no experience. And as the program is evolving, trying to figure out, do we need to balance that a little bit? If you bring in
Mhm.
people with no experience, then it might be a little bit harder to get to that end goal at the end of what was 12 weeks the first couple years, and then we expanded to 14 weeks. So certainly wrestling with that a little bit. But I
Sure.
think realizing the desire and need out there from even folks who have some journalism background was probably the biggest surprise.
That's very interesting. And so how did you pitch it? Did you pitch it as Journalism 101 or
Mhm.
more?
We pitched
Okay.
it, yeah, absolutely, as journalism 101, as giving people in DC, particularly those in communities that maybe are less served in a positive way by journalism, the opportunity to use the tools of journalism to talk about and tell the stories that matter and address the issues that matter to their own communities.
Interesting. So, okay, and you boiled that down to a cohort of how many people did you wind up
12.
with?
Mhm.
12. Okay, so that's a lot to bring down.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, and you all are, journalism is not your skill set. So tell
No,
us
not
how
at
you
all.
how you built that program and what people learned during I mean, 14 weeks is a long time. That's longer than many college semesters. So,
Mhm.
um, that's a
Yeah.
comprehensive journalism 101.
So we were very fortunate in the first couple of years, of course, that we still had Dana assisting with a program. So she's a journalist herself. So she brought that knowledge into developing the program. She worked closely with Cole Goins to develop the curriculum and build on some materials that he had in developing our curriculum, and then recruiting local journalists to act as the instructors. So we have one instructor and then what we call journalist trainers, three of them, and then, so the 12 participants also work in small groups with their journalist trainers. So every other week, there's a workshop that's about walking through the curriculum. And then the alternating weeks are with their journalist trainer to reinforce what they've learned. And when they're working on the articles, really giving them support in identifying what they want to cover, developing their pitch, etc.
Mm,
So that's where the real knowledge and the understanding of journalism came from externally. First with Dana, and then Christine is another local journalist who helped to develop the program, bringing that insight, and then actual working journalists acting as the instructor, and then the journalist trainers. And then in the third year, we realized it would be helpful to have an editor role as well. So we brought
sure.
on a professional editor in this past year, and that was a real great asset to the program to finalize the stories before they went on to the publications that were interested in publishing them.
Right. No, and that makes perfect sense because everybody needs an editor.
Hmm.
Not everyone thinks they do, but
Right.
everyone needs an editor.
And
And
that's the
so,
toughest part for many folks too, is being edited, as I'm sure you know, and as we learned.
oh, yes, because, especially I think when you're dealing with a non-professional cohort that really feels compelled to say something, and
Hmm.
language matters, words are important. And so when you have an editor being like, "Oh, I think we should do this or reframe that, or you need another something here," that can be very difficult to
Hmm.
hear.
Hmm.
Even when you kind of understand what that process is supposed to be like.
Hmm.
So I wanted to go back to the development of that cohort because when I read the stories and the pieces in the last publication that you had, the Humanities DC one,
Hmm.
um, they were all like, you think, okay, well, this is journal. Some of them were first person narratives, some of them were more historical. What were people saying that they wanted to get out of this program? Like, could some of them have been like, "I just wanna be a good writer," or, "I wanna get published," or, "I think
Hmm.
I can know that better."
Yeah, we certainly saw a lot of different things that people wanted to get out of it. When selecting the individuals for the cohort, we tried to focus on those who seemed like they were interested in actually journalism, using the skills toward that end. But not everybody's thinking about that, not necessarily in a formal way.
Mhm.
So there was a bit of a range, but everybody expressed that we selected that in some way they wanted to continue to write in a way that served the community in some
Mm,
kind of way, getting stories out there in some way. It might not be with a newsletter, it might be with their own website or something else that they might be working on or thinking they might do.
sure. And then DC is a pretty big place. Did you draw from all the different wards, or did you have kind of a geographic diversity that you were looking to do?
Yeah, we did have a geographic diversity, maybe not as much. Our initial thought was it would be great to particularly get a lot of folks from Ward 7 and 8 because
Mhm.
there's this feeling and understanding that the stories that come out of there from externally tend to focus on the negative and not
Right.
focus on a broad range of activities that are happening in there in those areas. And we certainly have folks from that area. I think we probably thought, oh, maybe half the program would be that. And it hasn't worked out that way yet.
Mhm.
We do want to, as we continue to do recruiting for next year, because we just learned that we are able to do another program, make
Oh,
sure that
congratulations. Good.
yeah, we're really excited about that. Make sure that we're fully reaching the gatekeepers and organizations and people who can ensure that the news of the program's availability gets out to everyone. And then if folks just aren't interested, that's fine too. But
Hmm.
yes, we definitely had spread all across the city, and we're really happy about that because it was people from all different kinds of backgrounds and walks of life engaging with each other. So that was, I thought, very valuable.
And it seemed like a really kind of an intensive program because it's when you said the journalism instructor was working in small groups, then there's also, like the actual, I guess, lecture or coursework.
Mhm.
Um, so tell us a little bit about what happens in those sessions. So, you come in all bright eyed and bushy tail and say, I'm gonna knock an investigation out of City Hall and root out corruption and do all
Right.
the things that you want to do. How does that, what do you kinda start with, when you're
Mhm.
orienting people?
Yeah, so there's a pretty full curriculum that tries to cover a lot of different topics from how do you select a story to how do you research a story and being edited and developing a pitch and pitching a story and all the other pieces in between. So it's been pretty standard format of there's a lecture with our PowerPoint. We have a wonderfully engaging instructor, luckily. So he makes it, George Kevin Jordan, a local journalist, makes it very engaging. He teaches most of the time he's up there, but the journalist trainers also co-teach with him, different ones
Mhm,
at different times. So it gives them a little bit of a variety. And then they're bringing whatever their particular area of expertise is into it. And so what topics gets covered, it's pretty interactive with the participants kind of giving their insight, and the journalist trainers, they don't have to be there every week, but many of them choose to kind of giving their insight as well. And it's mostly taking in information, although in an interactive way, and then they're digesting it in the following week when they're in the small group with their journalist trainers. Sometimes it's all three of them with their journalist trainers. Sometimes it might be one-on-one. They're having one-on-one conversations in that all week. So it kind of depends on where they are in the curriculum.
mhm. No, and so your journalism trainers are also, I think, finding new and exciting things about their craft and how they're putting it out. So can you tell us a little bit more about, um, how you're partnering with those journalists and sort of and why they're 'cause I mean, maybe you're paying amazingly well,
But
but, I
we
feel like it's a
probably
labor
are.
of love for them as well.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, that's been really exciting that we've, been able to get some great folks, and what they've maybe come at it from different places, but they all seem to be saying just the idea of helping to bring along the next generation or next folks who are thinking about wanting to be engaged in journalism, feeling that they're passing on their experience and helping to build up the next generation of journalists is what we're hearing in different ways from everyone.
Mhm.
Um, so that's been really exciting. And they're all coming from different perspectives. And over the 3 years, probably different generations themselves too, which has been really nice. So the participants are really getting a mix of perspectives, which has been lovely.
Oh, that is good. And so,
Mhm.
tell us, about the stories that are coming up, and then also how you think that this is helping like, a lot of what journalism news media organizations, I think struggle with right now is making sure they're reaching, underserved audiences or being relevant to the ways that people get information. So I'm
Mhm.
interested in sort of the types of stories that people are surfacing, and then also how it relates to what we're doing, in journalism.
Yeah, so people come in wanting to do all different types of stories as you can imagine, and then between the instructor and then their more one-on-one time with the journalist trainers helping them to refine that and figure out what will really work. Sometimes the story that they initially want to do, it ends up not working because whether they can't find sources or it doesn't seem realistic in the time frame. And also, it's been somewhat limited to some degree what we think makes sense. So, for instance, investigative journalism story has been determined that that probably doesn't make sense for the time frame that we have. Um, but beyond that, they're coming up with the stories that they find interesting. Something times it's
Mhm.
something that they may have come with to the program, and other times it's based on the conversations that have been had. And some of the exercises they do at the beginning is going to community events and hearing from
Mm.
people in different types of community events. And so based on that, maybe a story is going to come to them, or just spending time thinking about what am I interested in, what's my background, and what connection might there be for me. They come up with 3 pitches and then work through those to end up deciding
Okay.
what's the one that they think is going to work with the assistance of the professionals in the room.
And then how long are the pieces that are coming out? I mean, some of them they seem to be a wide range from my
Mhm.
small,
Yeah.
research.
Yeah, it has been a bit of a range. I'm trying to remember the length that we tell folks. We give them a not really long length that the story will be, but it's interesting sometimes when it gets to the publishing entity, they might want it to be a different length than it started out to be, or shorter,
Sure.
and so then we'll have to kind of work with that. But I'm actually not remembering the length. The ones that you saw in that publication, I think, are pretty typical of what folks tended to get them down to within a little bit of a range.
Hmm. Okay. That makes sense. And so what do you think the effect has been? Do you know if the community members those who were published, do they go on to freelance for those publications? Or I'm sure you do surveying and sort of
Mhm.
lessons learned. So what's
Yeah.
the outcome?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that we're hearing from folks, and we haven't figured out quite how to do this, is they want to have continued um, support and getting together to talk with each other and with the journalists that they've gotten to know during the program. So we're still trying to figure out what's that kind of alumni support that we do that helps folks who want to continue to stay engaged. We have a few folks that we know have continued to formally pursue journalism, and we're continue to doing some follow-up to figure out how is that changing over time. But over the so we've now done it 3 times. So I haven't done the follow-up yet with this year's cohort. The first 2 cohort, I would say is probably maybe 1 person per cohort definitely is kind of pursuing it very intentionally, and
Okay.
others in different ways are trying to continue writing. And it's really important, I think, for us to figure out how can we keep them engaged and keep supporting them in some kind of way to, as so they don't feel that they're on their own, still very new in the idea of journalism, and on their own trying to figure out what are the next steps and pushing themselves to keep writing and keep figuring out how to pursue it. So we're trying to really intentionally think about what is that support that we can provide to help them with that.
So what are you feeling like now you're going to be in your 4th cycle
Mhm.
of the program? What's changing now that you've done a lot of evaluation, a lot of thinking through? Tell me how you're um, fine tuning the program based on what you've learned.
Mhm. I just was having a conversation with George because the knowing that we're going to do it again next year, it's happened in the last couple of within the last 2 weeks that we got a grant we'd been hoping for. So we're like, okay, we need to figure this out and kind of kick it off for next year. So
Yeah.
having that conversation with George was really helpful as I thought about what has gone well, what do we think we need to tweak. One of the things, and I referenced this a little bit earlier, is figuring out what is the right mix of experience versus no experience. So one of the
Hmm.
things is we initially tried to keep the application very simple so there's no barrier to entry, but as a result, we don't have a sense of folks' writing ability through the application. So we're going to add questions this year that allows them to write at least a little bit so we get a sense of that ability,
Hmm.
and try to maybe not be so strict as you have little to no experience, and maybe having some experience could still be beneficial and make you possibly get a little bit more out of the program because you're starting at a better point. And so you're better able to incorporate what you're learning and churn out an article that might be more realistic. The last couple of weeks, I've heard from a few people who are interested in the program, who found out about it some ways and are wondering if we're going to do it again. And one was a gentleman who said, he talked about the experience he's had. And I said, well, I don't think this program is for you. And he responded to say, I've never had training. I've just kind of picked this up myself and figured that
Oh,
out. So
uh-huh.
that's an example of, I'll have to dig a little deeper, but maybe this program could be for him. Like figuring out what that sweet spot is. You don't want someone to be frustrated and bored, but
Right.
maybe there's something that he could gain from it, even though he's been doing some writing himself.
So have you seen, you said you started off with 67 applicants for your
Mhm.
first cohort. Has it been that kind of response each
It
time?
No, it's changed over time. It dropped to just 25 in 2024, not totally sure why, and then last year it went up to 54 applicants. So,
I wonder why.
not totally sure what that was about, actually.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes like when there's pent up demand for a program like this,
That's
you
true.
know, a lot of people kind of come on board and then think, well, gosh, I can get that experience in this way or that way.
Mhm.
Um, and so it feels like in some ways the people who are there maybe have some interest in journalism, but more in self-expression. So what do you think? And I know that you don't sit within the industry, but what lessons do you think news media can take from this type of program?
I think the idea that there's a yearning to see from folks to see themselves in what they're
Mm,
reading and to see their community represented in different ways is definitely one of those things. Because as you said, folks are really interested in learning these skills, and in some cases to thinking about actually doing journalism, and in other cases just wanting to be able to express themselves. So one, wanting to see themselves and their community in different ways, but also wanting the opportunity to be the one to have an outlet to provide that information, that story, that perspective on that community that might not be what we think of as strict journalism, but having an outlet for that is of value as well. So I think that's a couple of the things that I've been thinking about.
mhm,
But also, I do think, I mean, similar to what I said before, I do feel that more of them are still interested in thinking about journalism, not necessarily as a career, but as something that they might do, but needing more support in order to do it. So I think that's the other thing that I would say, that the opportunity to provide support to folks who might not have this formal training, but could be a real asset to the news media if there
mhm,
could be an on-ramp for them that might not be in a traditional way, but is there a way for them to develop skills and experience and provide some perspective that might be missing in traditional media that they
mhm.
would be able to offer? So
Well,
are
you
there
know,
different, on-ramps and entry points?
I've been really interested in the Documenters Project, which trains, and I think Cleveland probably has the most developed program, if
Okay.
I'm not mistaken, where and it's an independent project. It's not necessarily news media driven, but I think has a lot of applicability, which has trained individuals in the community to cover and take notes about public meetings and,
Hmm.
you know, town hall meetings or zoning board or whatever the case might be, because oftentimes reporters really don't have unless they know something's on the docket that we need to cover.
Right.
There's too many, you know, in a lot of, gosh, if you look in you know, like Frederick County in Maryland, if you wanted to know everything that the government's doing, you would have to go to 17 different meetings.
Hmm.
Um, and that's a lot for anyone. And so reporters definitely are prioritizing. But if you had, you know, a cadre of concerned community members who are monitoring that and then maybe having that pipeline to say, oh, this is something like this is
Hmm.
something here, that I'm just really interested in ways that communities and news media can work together.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that would be that type of effort that's giving people that kind of on ramp or entry point to engage with local media and provide, get more involved in what's going on and being able to share that in some ways and have this funnel to do that, I think would be wonderful. It's a great role that there is potentially to play, especially as, I mean, everyone is seeing it that everywhere, and DC certainly is, as less and less local coverage, less and less coverage is what's actually happening.
Right.
How can we take advantage of people who do care in their community and want to be able to share and pay attention to what's going on? How can we take advantage of that? I think that'd be a great partnership between community members, community organizations, and local media.
And at heart, local news really fosters civic engagement. And
Mhm.
so that's the goal. Like, we want people to be interested, engaged in their communities, however they are considering their community. Um, and so I did also want to ask you, of course, had to secure funding for this. You all aren't made of pots of money. So
Mhm.
when you go to funders, I'm interested also in knowing what funders are saying about news media. Like, is this something that I think when we first spoke, you weren't sure if there was going to be, if you were able to,
Right.
if you were going to be able to run the program this year. It's a lot of um, tumult in the philanthropic world, but
Mhm.
what made this program compelling to your funder, and who is your funder on this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when we started the program, all councils get funding or used to get funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities. And so when we first started the program, it was a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, in addition to our regular grant. And then NEH cut the grants last year. We're waiting to see what will happen this year.
Mhm.
And then Cornelia T. Bailey, which was a funder that we weren't that aware of, our development person found them. They weren't specifically about journalism, but she just pitched the program to them and they funded it and then pitched it again this year and we got additional funding. So far, something that we want to really focus on is identifying folks who are interested in this specifically because it is a journalism program. But right now it hasn't been that. It's been just a funder who just like the idea of the program, but they aren't a journalism funder, so to speak, and
Mhm.
they agreed to support the program. So yeah, that's what we're going to be. One of the things we're going to be focusing on is figuring out how do we shore that up for continued funding, certainly, but also what the next step is to support folks, whether it's a fellowship program for
Mhm.
individuals who are really serious, the one or two per year that said, I really want to figure out how to pursue this. Is there fellowship that we could build in? We would love that to provide that support, or just the ongoing supporting of each cohort as they graduate out and want to continue to think about this. So yeah, figuring out who those specific funders are is a bit of a priority for us moving forward, on top of everything else, of course.
Sure.
Trying to
It's a
figure
lot. It's a big
Mhm.
project for sure, but I do love that idea of sort of the what happens next, because now
Mhm.
that you'll have, 3 cycles, you sort of have
Exactly.
gotten your rhythm in, what works and what doesn't, and now how do you kind of keep that flame alive and that
Exactly.
excitement, because it can be difficult if you're just pushing out these individuals without a place to go, or
Mhm.
a network.
Mhm. Absolutely. So I'm thinking, one of the things I've been thinking about, because yes, I don't want it to be so that we wait too long to try to do it. So until we have funding to do something a bit more formal, whether it's the fellowship program or just ongoing cohort support, we started doing oral history meetups a year or so ago, which is just
Mm.
folks who are interested in oral history. They get together quarterly and they talk and support each other. And it's been really powerful. So thinking of doing something like that, where they just get together every month, every few months, and just share ideas and support. And hopefully some of the journalists who work with the program in the past, maybe they would periodically come. So thinking about what we can do on an informal basis to start out with, and then, see what happens in the future.
Got it. No, I think that makes perfect sense. So, that would be, and so tell us about, we're right in the timing. I don't know when your timeline is for applications, but
Mhm.
if someone's interested in the program, tell us the requirements.
Sure. So, DC resident who is interested in journalism, um, will be figuring it out by the time the application goes live. So it was kind of, like I said, just in the last couple of weeks, we found out we could do the program. So trying to stick with the same timeline as last year mean we'd have to launch it next week. So by then we'll figure out exactly what we're going to say the requirements are in terms of the writing experience, but definitely thinking about folks who have limited experience in writing and journalism and are really interested in building on that, with some hope of, in some kind of way, whether it's formally they want to think of themselves as a journalist in the future, or they just want to keep writing to uncover and tell the stories and the news of their community. That's kind of what we're going to be thinking about. We just need to figure out exactly what's the least experience we're going to expect and the most
Sure.
experience, but it will be towards the end of minimal experience.
Hmm.
And that's 18 and over. That's really, we tried to keep it pretty minimal in terms of experience. And then in terms of other requirements. And then we're just, when we have a large number of folks and they all kind of fit that bill, then we just try to have a mix of backgrounds and experience. So in addition to learning from the instructor and from the other journalists, they're able to learn from and gain insight from each other as well. So we try to mix up, people's backgrounds and
Hmm.
professions and all of that from
Yeah,
the
it's really
pool of
like pulling the
who
cohort
makes,
together.
right, who makes the requirements.
That sounds great. And so where do they go? So what's the URL if it's short
Uh,
or?
HumanitiesDC.org is our website. And so you'll see on there the link, and it'll go out in our newsletter. So fingers crossed, it will go out in next Thursday's newsletter and be launched Thursday the 18th. And
Okay.
we would launch it that day. And then applications will be due roughly a month later. So due in January.
Okay.
So
And
if you're on our newsletter, or on our email list, you'll get information about it.
okay, so mid-January, make sure that you're going to humanitiesdc.org to sign up or to publicize it. And we'll send it out in our newsletters as well. Um,
Wonderful.
so this it feels like sort of a very, maybe not revolutionary program, but a very unique program. Have you seen other areas do similar work, or are you the only one right now?
I'm sure we're not the only one, but clearly it does seem to be unique. And for me, coming new to this, that was a bit of a surprise. But the
Hmm.
more we talk, almost everyone we talk to about it is really intrigued and interested, and it's something that they haven't necessarily heard a lot about. When we were originally talking, and we stay in contact with him, Cole Goins from the new school, they're doing a program with in connection with community colleges, and that was our initial conversation. We were trying to see if we could develop a program like that, and we're still hoping that they would be a version like that. So certainly
Mm-hmm.
there are different models and things going on, but this very specific approach, yeah, it doesn't seem to be very common.
Mm. Well, and when we had talked previously, MDDC has an internship program, and so, but that's for students who have identified that they want to be journalists, and we've added in a writing coach and a mentor
Mhm.
because it is very difficult to kind of sustain in the
Mhm.
industry
Mhm.
without some of those supports,
Right.
because it can be, it can be a difficult profession to go into. So are I love how you've created this cohort model to really kind of draw people through the process and really make sure people are sharing information and stories of their community because that's
Mhm.
really what it's about. So congratulations on that.
Thank
Um,
you.
Seems like a terrific program. I can't wait to see what this year's cohort does. Maybe we can bring some of your budding journalists back to talk about what they're learning in the program if you'd like to
Oh,
do that.
that'd be lovely,
Yeah, that
yes.
would be kind of fun. So we'll do that. But thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for your interest in our program.
Thanks for listening to 5 Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, at mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.